Stunt work is one of the few jobs where a bad day on set erases the line between filmmaking and tragedy. If you're just joining us, I'm Patrick, and this is Last Records. From a traveling stunt show where a safety net failed to catch its performer, to a movie set rodeo scene where a bull turned back on a downed rider in front of everyone watching. It was July 12th, 2015, a fairground lot in Central Texas. A traveling stunt show had been set up there for 3 days. A steel cannon on a trailer, a landing net staked into the ground about 120 feet out, and a crowd that showed up each afternoon expecting a good time. Lund Cavett was 34 and had been doing this for 9 years. He started out in small circus shows across the Southeast before moving into traveling stunt exhibitions around 2011. By that summer, he was one of the more experienced human cannon performers working the circuit. Most people in the crowd never caught his name, and that was fine by him. He just showed up, did the job, and moved on to the next town. Here's something most people don't know about this stunt. There's no actual explosive powder involved. The cannon uses compressed air. The performer gets loaded into the tube. The mechanism fires, and they come out somewhere between 50 and 70 miles per hour. Sounds simple enough, but when you break it down to just a person and a net, it stops feeling like entertainment pretty fast. The show had been running 3 straight days in the Texas summer heat. The night before, irrigation runoff from a lot next door had soaked into the ground around the far anchor side of the net. 2 stakes on the right side had shifted. Not dramatically, maybe 4 to 6 inches from where they'd originally been set, but in rigging, 4 inches is not a small number. A crew member noticed the ground was softer than usual that morning and didn't do anything about it. By the afternoon, the pre-show check got cut short. They were running behind, and the crowd was already waiting. From the launch platform, 120 feet out, a slack net looks the same as a tight one. Lund did his check from up there, and nothing stood out. The launch was at around 3:40 in the afternoon. He came out of the tube at an estimated 62 miles per hour. Every crew member present later said the arc looked completely normal. Nobody saw anything wrong until the last half second. He hit the net slightly right of center. The right side didn't catch him. It folded. The shifted stakes had bled enough tension out of that side that instead of absorbing the impact, the net just gave way. His body rolled hard off the right edge and hit the ground, compacted dirt and gravel, right shoulder first, then his head. He bounced once, came to rest about 8 feet from the net's edge, face down, not moving. 2 crew members got to him within seconds. He was still conscious. He stayed that way for about a minute and a half before he went out. He didn't come back around after that. Emergency services arrived 11 minutes later. He was taken to a regional medical facility and pronounced dead about 40 minutes after arrival. The review confirmed what everyone already suspected. The 2 right side stakes had shifted enough that the net couldn't do its job, and the soft ground had been noticed that morning and left alone. Nobody caught it before the show went on. The examiner's findings came back clean and simple. The net contact left nothing significant. Everything that killed him came from the ground. The case was ruled an accident. No charges were filed. The show canceled its remaining dates. The rig went into storage, and as far as anyone could tell, it never came back out. With Lund, it was a net. With the next guy, it was a blade, and the only reason it was on that set at all is because 2 people assumed the other one had already checked it. It was March 4th, 2014, a private animal training ranch outside Simi Valley, California. Large fenced enclosures, professional staff, a facility built around making dangerous animals workable for film and commercial productions. Brooks Farrow was 41 and had spent 14 years working large predators on set. Lions, tigers, the occasional leopard. His job wasn't training. He was the handler, the person who actually went into the enclosure with the animal during a take. 14 years without a serious incident. In that world, that's not nothing. Tigers used in film are trained to follow basic cues and tolerate people, but trained is not the same as tame. When conditions are right, they comply. Change enough of those conditions, and all of that goes out the window fast. An adult male Bengal can weigh up to 550 pounds, and that shift from calm to not calm can happen in under a second. The animal that day was a 430-pound male Bengal that had been on location since 6 in the morning. By early afternoon, that's over 7 hours in a working environment. The first 2 takes ran long, and between them, the handlers noticed it was vocalizing more than usual, a low, repetitive sound. Not aggressive, just wound up. There's a difference, but neither one is a good sign. It was also 91 degrees that afternoon. Brooks had worked with this particular animal plenty of times and felt he had a red on it. That familiarity probably worked against him. A third take was called, even though the handler team wasn't fully comfortable. The production was behind schedule, and that tends to override everything else. Brooks entered the enclosure on the scripted path. The animal held position for about 11 seconds. It didn't growl, didn't shift its posture. It just took one fast lateral step and was on him. Initial contact on the left shoulder and the left side of the neck at the same time. Brooks went straight down under the weight of it. 430 pounds on top of a person, and there's not much you can do. The animal repositioned its bite twice in the first 30 seconds. The second one was on the throat. Handlers outside hit the air horns immediately, shouting, a non-lethal deterrent round. The animal didn't release for about 40 seconds. When it finally stepped back, Brooks was face up on the dirt, not moving. Blood spread wide across the enclosure floor. The handlers went in and applied pressure to the throat wound. The bleeding wasn't controllable out there. Air transport was called. He was airlifted to a regional trauma center and pronounced dead approximately 55 minutes after the attack. The bite to the throat had torn through the two main vessels on the left side of his neck. They sit close to the surface and carry a large volume of blood. Once opened that severely, nothing applied from the outside was going to be enough. The broken collarbone and cracked ribs were documented, but they weren't the issue. The animal was not put down. A behavioral review determined it was reacting to stress. 7 hours on location, repeated takes, and 91-degree heat pushed it past what it could handle. That finding shaped everything that followed. The ranch was cited for failing to enforce adequate rest periods for working animals and for allowing production pressure to override the handler team. Brooks had raised concerns before the third take. That was documented. The case was closed as accidental. The ranch suspended all film animal work pending review. When it resumed, the roster was significantly smaller. That's what 14 years of experience looks like when everything else stops cooperating. What happened in Albuquerque 2 years later came down to a single blade that was never supposed to leave the storage rack. It was February 18, 2016, an indoor production stage in Albuquerque, New Mexico. A period drama was mid-shoot. Dressed sets, dim lighting, stone-look walls. That day, they were filming a close-quarters sword fight sequence. Neil Welling was 29 and had been doing stunt work for about 3 years. Sword and fight choreography was his lane. Stage productions mostly. A handful of low-budget film sets. He was precise and reliable, the kind of performer who hit his marks and didn't complicate things. Nothing about that afternoon suggested it was going to be any different from every other take he'd done. Stage combat blades are either blunted or built with a tip that collapses on contact. They're designed so that a direct hit does nothing. Live blades, real sharpened steel, are never supposed to be on an active set. When they do come in for reference or display work, they're kept in separate storage. The problem is that up close, sitting on the same rack, the two look almost identical, especially when the labels wear off. The prop department that week was down one senior handler who was out sick, leaving a less experienced crew member managing the rack alone. A live display blade that had been brought in earlier in the shoot for reference photos got returned to the same rack as the combat props. The label on the handle had worn down to nothing, and on a busy shooting day, nobody was stopping to squint at prop handles. The choreography called for a direct thrust to the left side of the torso, close contact, meant to look like a clean hit on camera. With a proper stage blade, the tip is blunted and the steel flexes on contact, so the force dissipates against the body. Nobody had confirmed that the blade on the rack was that kind of blade. It was a live display piece with a sharpened edge and solid tip that did not flex or give on contact. The take started clean. Both performers moved through the opening exchange without any issues. Then came the scripted thrust, delivered with the right angle and force because that was what every rehearsal had trained into them. A stage blade would have stopped. This one went straight in. Neil took a step back, and there were a few seconds where neither performer fully understood what had just happened. Then the blade was pulled back, the wound opened, and the bleeding started fast. He was on one knee within 20 seconds and on the floor not long after, unconscious within 3 minutes. The on-set medic was there immediately, but the bleeding was internal, and there was nothing that could be done in that room. He was pronounced dead before reaching the facility. The blade was confirmed through manufacturer markings, display inventory, not prop stock. The worn label was recovered from the rack. The production was cited for safety violations, and weapon handling procedures were restructured before the shoot continued. Nobody faced criminal charges. The post-mortem confirmed what the on-set medic already suspected. The blade had caught a major vessel deep inside the chest, one that carries a large amount of blood and sits in a place that can only be reached in surgery. Once that vessel is cut, blood fills the chest cavity fast, and the heart runs out of what it needs to keep going. It's the kind of injury that's hard to survive even on an operating table. Neil never got anywhere near one. Everything about that set looked controlled and professional right up until it wasn't. The next story didn't involve an animal or a wrong prop, just a small piece of metal the size of your fist, and everything that depended on it holding. To October 7, 2016, a rooftop exterior set in downtown Atlanta, Georgia. A mid-budget production was shooting an urban action sequence. Dressed rooftop, crane arm rigged above it, a 74-foot controlled fall on the schedule for that afternoon. Orion Cranmer was 37 and had been in the stunt industry for 11 years, most of that time doing aerial and high fall work. He had credits on several productions and had built a reputation for being precise and thorough. He'd been doing it long enough to know that trusting someone else's check wasn't always enough. A rigged fall like this comes down to one thing: the connection point between the harness and the rig line. That connection is held by a carabiner, basically a metal clip with a gate that locks shut when closed correctly. What can go wrong with it is something called cross-loading, where the gate isn't fully locked and ends up taking force from the wrong angle. When that happens under enough weight, it opens. The problem is, you can look right at a cross-loaded carabiner and not see anything wrong. You can even give it a light tug and it holds. The only way to actually catch it is a full load test before the drop. The rigger who set up the rig that morning was experienced. This wasn't his first high-fall setup, and it wasn't going to be his last. But somewhere during the installation, the carabiner ended up cross-loaded. It's a positioning mistake that's easy to make and almost impossible to see once the harness is on. From the outside, it looks exactly like a correctly set connection. Orion did his own secondary check before the drop. The rigger had visually cleared it. Neither of them caught it, because from every angle available to them, there was nothing to catch. He stepped off the rooftop edge on cue. About a third of a second into the fall, the carabiner gate opened under the initial load shock. The harness connection point separated from the rig line. There was nothing slowing him down after that. He fell 74 feet in just over 2 seconds. A secondary crash mat that had been positioned below was removed earlier in the day to clear a camera angle. The landing surface was dressed concrete. He hit feet first, and the rest of him followed immediately. No movement after landing. The on-set medic reached him within 90 seconds and found no pulse. He was transported immediately and pronounced dead on arrival at the facility. The carabiner was recovered and examined. The gate was confirmed cross-loaded, an installation error, not a manufacturing defect. The rigger cooperated fully with the review, and his account lined up with what the physical evidence showed. It wasn't a case of someone cutting corners or ignoring a known problem. It was a positioning mistake that gave no visible indication anything was wrong, and nobody on that rooftop had any reason to think otherwise. The post-mortem was straightforward. Both legs broke on impact. Several internal organs tore from the force of the sudden stop, and the head came down against the concrete in the collapse after. The bleeding inside the skull that caused was never going to be survivable in that window. The examiner noted each injury separately, but the conclusion was the same. None of it was survivable from the moment he hit the ground. The rigger was not charged. Every review reached the same conclusion: a genuine mistake with nothing negligent behind it. The production shut down for the rest of the week, and full load testing before every drop became mandatory going forward. From Atlanta to an airstrip outside Tucson, and this time it wasn't a blade or a carabiner. It was a wind calculation that was just short of right. It was April 23, 2017, a decommissioned airstrip outside Tucson, Arizona. Wide open tarmac, nothing in the way. The kind of location productions used specifically because of how much space there is to work with. Slate Halstead was 31. Ramp work was his thing. 7 years of it, mostly commercial shoots and automotive campaigns. He wasn't the most well-known guy on the circuit, but he knew that airstrip setup better than anyone else on the crew that day. A ramp jump at this speed lives and dies by the calculation behind it. Launch speed, ramp angle, rider weight, wind, all of it goes into figuring out where the bike lands. What a lot of people don't realize is that a crosswind doesn't just push the bike sideways in the air. It shifts the entire landing position during the descent. At that speed, a few feet of drift is all it takes, and you'd never feel it coming until it's already too late. Rehearsal that morning was calm with no wind and clean conditions. In the hour before the live take, a 12-mile-per-hour crosswind picked up from the southwest. The speed was recalculated, but nobody factored in what that wind would do to the lateral trajectory. The steel barrier at the far end of the landing zone was a set piece that had been there since morning setup, just part of the dressed location, unremarked on by anyone. The take was approved. Slate was told the speed had been adjusted, and the crosswind never came up because the crew hadn't finished running the numbers far enough to know what it would do. He climbed on the bike and lined up at the ramp. That's the part I keep thinking about. He had no reason to believe anything was off. He launched at approximately 79 miles per hour. The arc looked clean from the ground. The crosswind pushed the bike about 6 feet left of the intended landing mark. The front wheel contacted the tarmac at a shallow angle, and the bike pitched forward hard. Slate went over the handlebars at full speed and traveled roughly 30 feet through the air before his left shoulder and the right side of his helmet made contact with the steel barrier. He came to rest on the tarmac, not moving. Air transport was requested immediately. He was airlifted to a regional trauma center, never regained consciousness, and was pronounced dead approximately 6 hours later. The wind recalculation records confirmed what the physical evidence already showed. The crosswind's lateral effect had been noted in the raw data, but never carried through into the final numbers. The steel barrier sat 11 feet from the outer edge of the landing zone, well within where a drifting bike could realistically end up that day. The post-mortem was straightforward. The helmet fractured on the right side. The impact tore small vessels between the brain and the skull, bleeding that has nowhere to go inside a closed space. It built pressure slowly over 6 hours until the brain couldn't keep the body running anymore. The investigation wrapped with an accidental ruling. Both the production company and the safety coordinator were cited. The barrier was removed from the location the same day. Slate's story came down to a number on a page. Raphael Dunwick's came down to a loose jacket cuff. It was January 9th, 2015, an industrial warehouse lot outside Detroit, Michigan. 28 degrees, flat concrete, and a heavy-duty winch mounted to a flatbed truck set up in the middle of it for a drag sequence. Raphael Dunwick was 44 and had 18 years in the stunt industry behind him. Most of that time was vehicle and industrial rig work, the kind of stunt work that requires as much mechanical knowledge as physical ability. Winch systems, specifically, were his territory. By that point in his career, a job like this was about as routine as it gets. A winch system isn't like most stunt equipment. These rigs generate several thousand pounds of pull force, and the cable under tension stores a massive amount of energy. If any part of a person's body or clothing makes contact with the cable near the drum, the rotating cylinder the cable winds around. It pulls with a force that no human muscle can fight, and it happens before you can do anything about it. The sequence called for Raphael to be dragged across the lot at a set speed while attached to the cable. He had run the same drag twice in rehearsal without any issues. What changed between rehearsal and the live take was small enough that nobody caught it in time. Because of the cold, Raphael was wearing a heavier jacket than his usual stunt wardrobe. The left cuff was loose and hadn't been taped or secured to his wrist. The winch drum had been repositioned closer to his drag path than in the rehearsal layout, a camera framing adjustment that was made without telling the stunt team. A cable guide sleeve, a component that physically prevents the cable from making contact with anything outside the drum housing, was not on the rig. The worst part is that none of it was visible from where Raphael was standing. The live take began. The winch engaged, and Raphael was pulled across the lot. About 40 feet in, the loose left cuff brushed the moving cable. The cable caught the fabric and pulled the sleeve into the drum in under a second. The left arm was drawn into the mechanism up to the mid-forearm before the drum stalled under the resistance of his body weight. His body was wrenched hard to the left, face down down onto the concrete. The winch operator killed the power within 4 seconds. Raphael was conscious, in shock, not making a sound. Crew reached him within seconds and got a tourniquet above the elbow. He was transported by emergency services and taken into surgery. He died on the table approximately 2 hours after the incident. The missing cable guide sleeve was confirmed in the post-incident review. Not installed, not signed off during setup. The drum repositioning was in the camera department's notes from that morning. Neither change had made it to the stunt team. The crushing had destroyed the blood vessels running through that section of the forearm entirely. The tourniquet slowed what was visible, but the internal damage was already beyond what it could address. By the time he reached the table, the blood loss had gone too far. The surgery couldn't pull him back. 2 crew members were cited for the missing sleeve and the unreported drum repositioning. The case closed as accidental. The winch rig was pulled from the production and not replaced for the remainder of the shoot. Detroit in January, and a winch cable is one kind of story. What happened outside Memphis comes down to one thing. The charge went off while someone was still inside the building. It was September 14, 2014, a condemned commercial building on the outskirts of Memphis, Tennessee. A film production had been using the structure for a partial demolition sequence. One exterior wall and a section of the roof rigged with timed charges for a controlled collapse on camera. Drake Stuntwell was 38 and had 10 years in the stunt industry, with a secondary background in pyrotechnic assistance. He had worked controlled demolition sequences on 3 prior productions. Timing protocols, evacuation windows, communication chains. He knew how all of it was supposed to work. That's a pretty rare combination on any production. A stunt performer who actually understands the explosive side of the work. Something worth understanding about how demolition sequences are run on a film set. The performer is given a hard evacuation window, typically between 30 and 45 seconds, between the final cue and detonation. That window exists because it accounts for the time needed to physically exit the structure and reach a safe distance. The most dangerous thing in a close-range detonation isn't the fire or the debris, it's the pressure wave. It moves faster than anything physical and hits the body before anything else even gets there. The radio channel the pyrotechnic team was using that day overlapped with a secondary production channel. It had caused broken communication twice already that day, and the channel hadn't been changed. Drake's evacuation cue wasn't delivered directly from the pyrotechnic lead either. It went through a 3rd crew member first. That relay added roughly 6 seconds to the cue. The detonation timer had already been armed, and once it was armed, nobody could stop it remotely. Drake was still 18 feet inside the building with no idea the relay hadn't reached him clean. He was moving toward the exit when the charge went off. The blast hit him while he was still about 9 feet inside the structure. The pressure wave from a detonation that close doesn't feel like sound or heat. It's more like getting hit by something invisible at full force. He was thrown about 12 feet into an interior wall. Chunks of concrete and steel rebar came down right after. A piece of rebar caught his upper back and right shoulder on the way down. Part of the roof came down about a second later and landed within 3 feet of where he was. Crew reached him within 2 minutes. He was face up, conscious but unable to move, partially covered in debris. He was transported to a regional trauma center, arriving conscious but deteriorating. He died approximately 3 hours after the incident. The radio interference was confirmed in the post-incident review. The relay delay was logged at 6.3 seconds, enough to have made the difference between clearing the structure and not. The preset timer was flagged as a design flaw for sequences involving personnel still inside at cue time. Drake survived long enough to be imaged at the trauma center, and that's how the full picture came together. The pressure wave had torn the main artery leading out of the heart. Blood was filling his chest from the inside, and there was no surgical fix available in that window. The rebar strike had also broken his spine at the mid-back level, which is why he couldn't move after the blast. The artery was the thing that ended it. The spinal injury was almost secondary by that point. The pyrotechnic lead and relay crew member were both cited. The case was ruled accidental. Every remaining demolition sequence was pulled from the schedule, and direct radio contact between the lead and the performer became the only accepted protocol going forward. Everything up to this point had some kind of paper trail, a log entry, a calculation, a radio record. In a rodeo arena in Tulsa, the only record that mattered was one nobody had thought to pull before the gate opened. It was June 3, 2016, a working rodeo facility outside Tulsa, Oklahoma. A film production unit had embedded within the grounds to shoot a bull riding sequence using real rodeo stock, actual bucking bulls, not trained film animals. The arena was active, the crew was set up along the rails, and the shoot was ready. Mercer Vane was 27 and had competed in rodeo circuits for 4 years before transitioning into stunt work. Bull riding was the one area where his rodeo background gave him a direct professional edge. He wasn't widely known in the stunt industry. He was brought in specifically because of his riding background. This was his second production involving live bull work. What makes rodeo bulls different from every other animal used in film work is that they are not trained. They are working bucking stock, selected and bred specifically for aggression and explosive movement. A bull in a chute before the gate opens is already wound up. Once a rider is thrown, the animal does whatever it wants. Some disengage and move away, some turn back. A mature bucking bull weighs between 1,500 and 1,800 pounds, and a horn strike at full drive delivers force comparable to a low-speed vehicle impact, concentrated into a surface area the size of a fist. The bull assigned to the sequence weighed 1,650 pounds and had 3 prior incidents of turning back on downed riders. That history was in the animal contractor's own records and never made it to the stunt team. Only 2 rodeo protection personnel were in the arena. The standard for an animal like this is 3. Mercer had never ridden this specific bull before, and his rope hand wrap was tighter than it should have been going into the chute. That's 4 things working against him before the gate even opened. The gate opened, and the bull came out hard, immediately going into an aggressive left-hand spin. Mercer was thrown at approximately 2.3 seconds, well short of the scripted 8. He landed on his right side, and his rope hand stayed partially caught in the wrap, briefly tethering him to the animal's movement. The bull turned back. First contact was a downward drive of the head into Mercer's right side just below the ribcage. He was lifted off the ground and thrown forward. The bull followed. Front hooves came down on his lower back and pelvis as he landed face down. The 2 bullfighters engaged and redirected the animal. Total contact time was approximately 8 seconds. Mercer was face down, not moving. There was visible deformity along the right side of his torso. On-site medical personnel responded immediately. Air transport was requested. He was airlifted to a regional trauma center and pronounced dead approximately 90 minutes after the incident. The bull's behavioral file was reviewed after the incident. The 3 prior pursuit incidents were all in the contractor's own records and had not been shared with the production. The 2 bullfighter setup was confirmed as below the recommended threshold for an animal with that profile. The rope hand wrap issue was noted in witness statements, but was not cited as a direct contributing factor. What the horn strike did internally only came together once the examiner's findings came back. The impact to the right side of his torso ruptured 2 organs that bleed heavily once damaged and can't be reached or slowed down from outside the body. By the time he reached the trauma center, the bleeding inside his abdomen had already gone past the point where surgery could do anything meaningful. The broken pelvis, fractured vertebrae, and broken ribs from the trampling were all documented, but the examiner was clear about what actually ended things. The animal contractor and the production company were both cited, one for withholding the bull's behavioral history, the other for the understaffed protection setup. No individual was charged. The bull was retired from rodeo and film work permanently. Mercer had 4 years of competitive riding behind him and had walked away from every one of them. That morning in Tulsa was the first time he didn't.